hey folks, this is a good recipe this time because nothing says, kind of country cooking better than a good chicken pot pie, right? Right, Sig? So anyways, this version that we're going to be making, you can do it several ways. One, you can buy your own pie crust. You can buy your own chicken stock. But I'm going to show you in this particular version how you make your own pie crust and how you make your own chicken stock, so that the whole thing then is essentially made from scratch. And we like food from scratch, right, Hannah? So anyway, it's a real simple process. I think fairly easy to make, and it's just outstanding from a taste perspective. You can't beat it. A lot of times we think of pot pies and we think of Marie Callender or whatever frozen junk, but this will rock your world in terms of taste. I hope you give it a try. So from our ranch to yours, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do with our chicken is, in this case, since I'm going to be making several of these pot pies, what I'm going to do is use a whole chicken. And the easy way for me to cut this up and get the backbone for my chicken stock is a nice pair of shears here, where you can just go in and clip the backbone right out. Okay. Okay, so now you've got the backbone out, and just going to cut that in half, and that we'll use to make a stock, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So now you've got a chicken that you can, roast as it is in a spatchcock fashion, which is this way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and separate it out. Okay, so remove the legs and the thighs, and then for the breast, just going to cut right down the middle. And there we go. And so now I have my chicken carved up. It's ready to be seasoned, put in the oven, and roasted. So we'll come back in just a minute once we get this transferred to the pan we're going to cook it in. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is season the chicken prior to roasting it. So what I did here is I made a rub that's real easy to make, and it's simply equal amounts. 1 teaspoon of thyme, 1 teaspoon of garlic, a teaspoon of kosher salt, and a teaspoon of lemon pepper, and a teaspoon of coarse black pepper. And just going to put this over the chicken. And actually, if you ever just have like a roasted chicken like this, it's actually not a bad simple rub to make for that chicken, and yeah, it has a great taste. So anyways, that's about enough. Now we're going to put this in the oven at 350 for probably about an hour to an hour and a half. We're going to check it and get a temperature on it, and we'll be back. Now again, in this recipe, making your own stock is certainly optional. You can go out and you can buy chicken stock for next to nothing nowadays, but if you have the time to make it, it's an incredible, adds incredible depth to the dish. So what I did was took the backbone, put it in a little pot with a couple stalks of celery, a couple carrots from our garden, an onion, and then you can use some of the leftover seasoning that we put on the chicken and just put about 2 pinches in there. And then to that I'm going to add 4 cups of water. And we're going to put this on the stove and we're just going to simmer it. Once we get it up to temperature, we're going to simmer it on medium-low for several hours. The more time you can allow this to simmer, the better. And we're going to have the lid on top of it once it's, not going to boil anymore. So we'll revisit this in just in a few minutes. Okay, so it's time to make the pie crust. So what I have here is 2 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour. We have a teaspoon of kosher salt, a 1/2 tablespoon of sugar, and we're also going to add in just a moment 1 1/4 stick of butter that is cubed up really small, and I put it in the freezer to make it very cold. That just helps whenever you're mixing this. And you're also going to need about a 1/2 cup of very cold water, and to that we're going to add a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is add in our butter. The salt and the sugar were already mixed into the flour and I stirred it around. So we've got the butter in here. Then you've got these little handy dandy tools, but basically you're going to be just cutting the butter into the flour. Now, if you have a food processor, you could put all this in a food processor and do some simple, pulses with the food processor just until you get the flour and butter to be almost like a sandy consistency, okay? So we'll continue by hand to just cut this in a little bit at a time, because what you're trying to do is have flour that has little grains of butter that are surrounded by the flour, so that when you cook this as a pie crust, those actually create little pockets, and that's what makes a pie crust or biscuit, if you're using if you're making biscuits, that's what makes them flaky. So I'll continue doing this and we'll come back in just a minute. Okay, so now we have our flour, and you can see that it's the butter has been cut in there pretty good, no huge chunks. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add the mixture of the water, which is again, this is a 1/2 cup of very cold water with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, and we're just going to mix a little bit at the time, maybe about half of that. Give it a little stir. Mix a little more. Now you just want to get this mixed. You may or may not have to use all the water, but you want to get this, you want to get the dough to a point to where, back in there, where if you squeeze it into a ball, it'll hold and still be a little crumbly. So that's probably about right. So I'm not going to add any more of the water mixture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dump this out onto a clean work counter here. Let the fun begin. So now what we're going to do is create a dough ball by just working the flour together, whatever method suits you. We're not looking for anything fancy here. We're not kneading bread. We're just trying to get this dough to fully incorporate all the moisture and to be one cohesive ball. And so you can just kind of push down and roll it over. The dough. And you really can't overwork it too much because by the time you've got it here, I'd say you're good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to flatten this into a disc. We're going to cover it with plastic, and then we're going to put it in the refrigerator until we're ready to actually to roll it out and make the pie. Okay? So we'll revisit this at that time. Okay, so now we're ready to start to build our filling for the chicken pot pie. So what we have here is 1.5 sticks of butter. I know that seems like a lot of butter, but I said this tastes great and is hearty. I didn't say it's for dieters. Okay, so we're going to melt this, and we're going to add about 2 cups of chopped onion. And we're going to add 1 stalk of celery. And we're going to cook this on medium heat until the onions and the celery are nice, translucent, and tender. So we'll come back in just a few minutes. Okay, so the carrots and the onion have cooked pretty good with the celery. Now we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour. We're going to stir that in. And we want to cook this to get that raw flour taste away. So probably cook this for just about 3 or 4 minutes tops. And it will thicken. And you got to keep stirring it though. And we'll be back. Okay, so while that flour is cooking, what we're going to do is we're going to strain off the broth that we made earlier, and because we're going to be adding that shortly. So I'm going to get that strained and we'll be right back. Okay, so our flour's been cooking here for a couple minutes, and now it's safe that we can add. Now I have 4 cups here of the broth that we made, and I'm going to add about half of that for right now. Give that a little bit of a stir. And now we can add the other half. As you can see, that flour really thickens it up. And that's what you want, because we're going to be adding chicken and some vegetables that will also have some water in them. And then putting that into the pie. So you want this to be kind of thick when you start adding the vegetables, again because of the water. Okay, so the next thing we're going to add is 2 teaspoons of salt and 1 teaspoon of pepper. Give that a stir. And then what I have is 2 cups total of, I have frozen corn, peas, and some fresh carrots that we got out of our garden. So we're going to add that. We're going to add about just under half a cup of heavy cream. Get that mixed in. And we'll just keep stirring this for a few minutes until it becomes at a low simmer. Okay, so now that the filling has recovered from adding those cold vegetables and the cream and it's back up to temperature, we're going to add the final ingredient, which is just over 2 cups of the chicken that we roasted earlier, and then I just pulled it. Some people want to chop it, however you like. Give this a stir. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to turn this down to low, and I'm going to let it cook for about 20 minutes on low and just kind of let all those flavors marry. Okay, so the chicken and vegetables have been slowly simmering in here on low for about 15 minutes. Everything's nicely up to temperature. The last thing we're going to do before we put it in the filling is we're going to garnish with a little bit of parsley. Okay, we'll stir that in. And now we're ready to make the pie crusts and get these into the oven. So as a special treat, Mrs. Triple H has joined us. She is the champion pie crust maker. And we're going to be making 2 pie crusts, one for the bottom and one for the top, and they will fit this probably what, 8 or 9 inch standard pie dish. So we're going to cut the dough in half. And set that off to the side. And then the other piece, we're going to work and get it molded into a small flat disc so that it can be kind of rolled out. Just an adjustment to make them even. Now it is important when you're rolling these out to make sure you keep turning the dough so that you know that it's not stuck to your countertop. Now we have a good amount of flour underneath it. And this dough is really cold, that's why it's, you know, a little harder. If we would have taken the dough out of the refrigerator maybe a little bit earlier, it might have had time to get more closely to room temperature and a lot easier to roll. Is that right, Mrs. Triple H?
Yep.
So now you take the dough, set it in your pie pan. Bada bing. Okay, so there's one. And I'll tell you, those are the best tasting pie crust. Like we said earlier, you can buy a pie crust, and you know, it's obviously a lot easier to do it that way. But I'm telling you, the taste does not compare, does it?
No, no, those are better.
Okay, so now we're ready to ladle in the filling. And keep in mind, we have made enough filling for at least 2 pies. One more spoon there.
Yeah.
Then you just take the dough and put it over. And then with wet fingers, you're just gonna kind of rub the bottom piece of the dough. And this just helps it stick. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that you've kind of sealed the edge good with the water all the way around, you can just go through and cut the excess dough off so that you don't have big hunks of dough hanging. Well, I guess you could cook that just that way, and if you like the pie crust that much, you could add it in, but anyway. Now you're going to do the trick where you seal the top and the bottom crust together by pushing down. There's other methods. You can use a fork, and there's all kind of different ways to do it, but this is how Mrs. Triple H does it. She makes some good pies. So we keep doing this all the way around.
Okay.
Now we're just going to take a knife and we're going to cut a couple slits in it so that it will vent.
Yeah.
And it is ready for the oven. Now we're going to cook this at 400 degrees until the crust on top is golden brown. So we'll get back to you in just a few minutes after we've had it in the oven. So this took about 20 to 25 minutes in our 400 degree oven, and the crust came out really nice and golden brown. The crust was also very flaky, tender. The filling was creamy, had the perfect amount of vegetables and chicken in it, and overall I'd give it a 10 out of 10 taste-wise. So it's something you've got to give a try to, and I hope you enjoy it. Come back to the Triple H Ranch Life for more recipes. See you soon.